Okay, so starting off today's show, we will do the same thing that we do every Monday here on the Zach Kroll Sports Podcast to start the show, and that is with me giving you guys my top 10 main takeaways of the week from the college basketball season. So, without further ado, boys, hit the music. Here we go. Takeaway number 1. Even though their schedule so far may not reflect it, Michigan really looked good against Maryland and Northwestern this past week. And a lot of people have been asking me over the last couple weeks, Zach, Michigan is undefeated. They play in a league that is very difficult, like the Big Ten. How are you going to unrank Michigan and not have them ranked until this week? Well, I got to be honest with you. I watched Michigan in some of their wins, and they didn't necessarily impress me. I mean, for God's sakes, they barely beat Oakland a couple weeks ago. But watching them against Maryland up close and watching them against Northwestern up close, this is a top 20 team. I don't necessarily know if I'm willing to say they're better than that just yet. I would want to see them beat Iowa. I would want to see them beat Illinois. I would want to see them beat Rutgers. I would want to see them beat a Wisconsin or a team like that. But it's a good start for the season for Juwan Howard. And I do think when you watch Michigan, it is clear and evident to me that they are one of the 5 or 10 best coach teams in the country. They come ready to play each and every week. The freshman Hunter Dickinson has been phenomenal. Isaiah Livers hasn't necessarily been the same player he's been over the last couple years, but I'm confident he gets it back going. Franz Wagner has been an absolute stud. Eli Brooks has been good. The point guard transfer, Mark Smith, he's been looking good. So I think Michigan is definitely going to be a team I'm keeping my eyes out on, and they add to the depth of the Big Ten. Takeaway number 2. I wanted to say I just feel so bad for UCLA and Chris Smith. Chris Smith is a guy that I was so excited when he announced he was going to be coming back to UCLA earlier this offseason, and he's a guy that has been through the battles. He's been through the wars. He was on this UCLA team when Steve Alford was the head coach. He was in his 4th year of college basketball and was getting ready to lead UCLA possibly to their 2nd straight Pac-12 title, and it's just even more unfortunate that Chris Smith was UCLA's best player last year, and they really have the whole squad back, and they were ready to run it back, and I watched them against Utah. I watched them against Colorado without the services of Chris Smith, and they looked really good, and I still think they're capable, but to see a senior get injured out for the season like that, super, super unfortunate, and I wanted to say I'm thinking about Chris Smith, and I hope he does well in his recovery. But when you look at the Bruins and what this means for the rest of their team, I still think they're capable. They just may have to rely on other guys to score a little bit more. And I understand that's not easy, but you have a team full of experienced guys like Tiger Campbell, like Johnny Juzang, who played at Kentucky, and he's really going to have a bigger chance to expand his role in the UCLA offense. Cody Riley, Jalen Hill, Jaime Jaquez, guys like that. So the Bruins, luckily for them, are still going to have plenty of experience. I'm just curious to see what a guy like Johnny Juzang, what a guy like Jake Kyman, what a guy like Jules Bernard might do with this new opportunity. That's a name I'm really going to be focusing my eyes on for UCLA now. Jules Bernard, a guy that's been in the Bruins system for a couple of years now, but I think with Chris Smith out, he is going to have a real opportunity to make a statement and deserve some more playing time and really have a bigger part of the UCLA offense. And I just wanted to say once again, best of luck to Chris Smith. I hope he recovers as soon as possible. Takeaway number 3. A lot of people were saying after their loss to Tennessee, Missouri's fraud. They never deserved to be ranked to begin with. We all saw this coming. And I get it. The loss against Tennessee wasn't ideal. But I was actually really impressed with the way they went on the road and handled Arkansas on Saturday to give the Hogs their first loss of the season. Jeremiah Tillman was a player that really stood out to me in particular. He was great for Missouri in their game against Arkansas. And if you have followed Jeremiah's career, he's been a guy that has had some trouble staying on the court. When he is not in foul trouble, that is usually when the Missouri Tigers are at their best. And in 28 minutes, he had 25 points and 11 rebounds against Arkansas, and he absolutely abused Connor Vanover. If you were an Arkansas fan watching that game, I think you realized pretty early on that Jeremiah Tillman was just going to have himself an absolute field day, and that's what happened as the Tigers ended up getting the win 81-68. And the SEC, I knew it was wide open, but it could be a little bit more wide open than everyone thinks. Missouri, just after they get blown out by Tennessee, they go to Arkansas and win. Tennessee, as we're going to get into a little bit later in the show, they go into Missouri, get a huge dub, and then get beat by Alabama on the road. We know Kentucky isn't very good. We'll get to Florida in a little bit, but Arkansas was a team that went on the road to Auburn and won, and based on that offensive performance, there was a lot of people that were really getting ready to hop on the Arkansas bandwagon, and I still think they're really good. I think they're like a top 25, top 30 team, and I do trust Eric Musselman as a head coach to get the job done. However, Arkansas did not play well on Saturday against Missouri, and they're going to need Connor Vanover in particular to be better if they want to be successful. Takeaway number 4. The Minnesota Golden Gophers are one of the 2 or 3 most underrated teams in the country right now, and Marcus Carr is a big reason why, and I think him as a player is just super, super underrated. I watched Minnesota up close in 3 games this week. They blew out Michigan State, got blown out by Wisconsin, but what really impressed me was the way they were able to respond and really run Ohio State out of their gym. They ended up getting the win 77-60. Marcus Carr was good. He had 15 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists in this game. But how about my guy Liam Robbins, the Drake transfer, in 36 minutes, 27 points, and 14 rebounds against Ohio State. That was super, super impressive. They have a guy in Booth Gotch who can make shots, transfer from Utah. They have a guy in Gabe Kalsher who can make shots. They have Brandon Johnson who can make shots. Eric Curry comes off the bench. He provides some experience. Jamal Nashburn Jr., although he could take some questionable shots at times, he could really play. Trey Williams could really play. I like this Minnesota team, and it's unfortunate because we all know just how loaded the Big Ten is. I feel like Minnesota has experienced that already this season with their loss to Wisconsin and with their loss to Illinois, but this is a Minnesota team that now has a win over Iowa. This is a Minnesota team that has a win over St. Louis, who I believe is a top 20 team right now. This is a Minnesota team that has a win over Ohio State, who I consider to be a top 25 team right now. And we'll see what the Gophers do. Their next 2 games, at Michigan, at Iowa. Those games will be very interesting to watch, but I give the Gophers a legit chance to win both of them because they could really play. I think Richard Pitino has done a really nice job this season. He did a decent job last season. If you're a Minnesota fan, you would have wanted to make the tournament last year. I get it. But at the same time, I think he's doing a really good job with this year's squad. Richard Pitino and the Gophers deserve credit. Takeaway number 5. Watch out for Creighton. And if you've been following this podcast since the beginning of the season, Creighton is a team that going into the season I was very high on, and I understood. They lost Tyshawn Alexander, and that was a loss that they were going to probably was going to take some time for them to get over. He was a guy that really did a lot on both sides of the ball for the Blue Jays last year. However, the improvement of Damian Jefferson has been really impressive, and I feel like when you look at this Creighton team, one of the biggest problems they've had so far in this early season was the fact that besides Damian Jefferson, take him out of the equation, when you lose a player like Alexander, you need other players on the team to improve. And Zagorowski's been good when you look at the numbers. He's been averaging 14.4 points per game, about 5 assists and 4 rebounds. But if you watch Creighton with your eyes, I think it's pretty clear to tell that so far in this early season, Marcus Zagorowski hasn't necessarily been the same player that he's been in the past. And that did change against Providence. He played really well in that game, along with Damian Jefferson. Zagorowski's numbers in that game, 37 minutes, 20 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, super impressive. But Creighton is a team to watch out for because over the last couple games, it looks like they finally hit their stride. They had the tough loss to Marquette at home. Then they barely beat UConn on the road, which was a tough win. They didn't necessarily look very impressive there. If UConn could make a couple free throws, the Huskies end up winning that one. But Creighton is playing some really good basketball right now. They go into Providence and win. That's a Providence team that is really good. And even though it was only a 2-point game, if you watched, Creighton really dominated that game throughout. And their next 3 games are home against Seton Hall, home against St. John's, and at Butler. That could be a 3-0 stretch for the Blue Jays, which could really build them momentum as we hit Big East play. Takeaway number 6. I told you Minnesota was one of the most underrated teams in college basketball, and I do believe that. But I will give you right now the most underrated team in college basketball, and that's the Clemson Tigers. And I understand, if you're a Clemson fan, you're probably going to need me to say that after your football team got ran off the field by Ohio State. That game wasn't necessarily close. I'm sorry, I know it may be a little too soon. But going back to Clemson basketball, this was another team that I was able to watch twice this week, pretty close. And against Florida State, it was impressive. I don't necessarily think they played their best game, but still, they found a way to win. And then against Miami, going on the road, and I don't care if you look at Miami and say, oh, come on, the Canes aren't that good. But no, Miami was healthy in this game. They're a really good team, and playing on the road in a conference game is always tough. And Clemson was able to go on the road and once again not play their best game and still find a way to win. And that's why I was just so impressed with the Tigers. And usually I'm not a big Brad Brownell guy, but since very early on in the season, Clemson has been a team that I have really liked. We saw them dominate Purdue. We saw them beat Mississippi State. We saw them beat Alabama. Yeah, they had one hiccup on the road against Virginia Tech, but still, they go to Miami and win. They beat Florida State at home, which I think makes up for that. And then their next 3, home NC State, at UNC, and at Syracuse. If the Clemson Tigers could go 2-1 in that stretch, I think that would be a win for them going forward. And I really like some of the guys on this team. Amir Sims, there are not many players as experienced as him in college basketball. Alamir Dawes, Nick Honor, Clyde Trapp. They are a really good team, and I think Clemson has a shot to win the ACC. The ACC, especially at the top, is wide open, and they play really good and tough basketball. I'm impressed with Clemson. Takeaway number 7. I'm starting to get a little bit concerned about the North Carolina Tar Heels as we stay in the ACC. I watched North Carolina against Georgia Tech. They really didn't look good. And if you're North Carolina, that's a game you should win. And then against Notre Dame, they only won by a point. And I understand that the freshman Deron Sharp has been really good. And I get it. That's a really good sign for UNC going forward. It's obviously very hard to ask freshmen going into a situation like that to really produce, especially when you have guys playing with you that have a year of experience over you, like Armando Bacot, or a guy in Garrison Brooks who has played a lot. But Roy Williams and the Tar Heels are struggling, but not exactly in the way I expected them to. To be honest, they can't stop turning the ball over. You watch them against NC State. You watch them against Georgia Tech, and they just couldn't take care of the basketball. And with a freshman point guard and another freshman guard in RJ Davis, I understand that's going to happen. But if I'm a UNC fan, where I'm frustrated is this. The ACC is wide open. I feel 1,000% confident telling you right now that I believe Clemson is the best team in the ACC. Duke has obviously struggled. They've been worse than expected. Virginia, they have struggled and been a little bit worse than we've expected. You look at UNC, they struggled. So the league is wide open, and still when you watch North Carolina, they don't necessarily look like that great of a basketball team right now, and we know historically this has happened to some of Roy Williams' teams in the past, and they've been always able to find a way to get out of it. But to be honest with you, I'm just not necessarily sure that that's definitely going to happen, because I don't necessarily know if there's like a legitimate scorer on this team that can just go get you buckets at any time. I love Deron Sharp. I love Garrison Brooks. But I just would love to see the guards improve a little bit for this UNC team. Takeaway number 8. I just hope Oscar Tshiebwe is okay. If you missed it, the West Virginia forward left the team for personal reasons. And according to Bob Huggins, he is not going to be coming back this season. And I just hope he's okay. Oscar's a very talented player, a guy that I had some very high expectations for going into this season. And to be honest, his loss really does hurt this West Virginia Mountaineer team. And I understand they do have some other big men. They have plenty of depth, most notably Derek Culver, a guy that has started basically every game this season, and he's been the rock of this West Virginia Mountaineer team. But let's face facts. With a healthy Oscar Tshiebwe, I predicted the West Virginia Mountaineers before the season started to make the Final Four. And even though they had some tough losses earlier in the season, to Gonzaga, to Kansas, they always looked like, to me, one of the better basketball teams in the country. But then on Saturday, I watched them against Oklahoma, and even though they were down big and found a way to come back and make it a game late in the end, I wasn't necessarily impressed. And good for Oklahoma. This is a Sooner team that lost to Texas Tech earlier in the season, and they are really trying their best to build their resume to make the NCAA tournament to the best of their ability. And I was also really impressed with the kid Umoja Gibson, the transfer from North Texas, hitting 8 threes in this game, carrying the Oklahoma Sooners. But at the same time, I'm a little bit worried about West Virginia, because what made them so good and so physically imposing were the size of their big men, Culver and Shibwe, and then plus when you consider their guards on the perimeter, McBride and McNeil, when they're making shots, West Virginia is a very tough team to beat. But look, West Virginia has a quick turnaround to deal with tonight as they go on the road to Oklahoma State and face off against Cade Cunningham. And if you remember, Oklahoma State just beat Texas Tech, which will be a big game for the Cowboys. I'm really looking forward to that one. Takeaway number 9. Iowa needed that game against Rutgers, and even though they lost, Rutgers is still one of the best teams in the Big Ten for me, and one of the best 15 to 12 best teams in the country. That game was a flat-out war. Luka Garza, Ronnie Harper Jr., Geo Baker, Miles Johnson just going toe for toe and blow for blow with each other. And it's going to be really interesting to see how exactly both of these teams go from here. Because Rutgers, I understand, it's a loss and you never want to lose, especially at home. But at the same time, the Scarlet Knights were not 100% healthy. They were missing Cliff Omarui. They were also, in the game they lost against Ohio State, they were missing him. Miles Johnson fouled out. But Rutgers has many different guys that could beat you. And they're starting to get healthier, even without Cliff. The return of Caleb McConnell, a guy who was a significant part of the team last season. It looked like for most of this season was going to be a medical redshirt, but he somehow, some way, finds a way to get himself back on the floor. And Steve Peichel, he's just a coach I flat out trust and believe in. I think Rutgers will be fine. For Iowa, there were a lot of people that going into this game after they lost to Gonzaga and after they lost to Minnesota, they were just calling them a fraud. And I never thought Iowa was a fraud. I think they're somewhere right now between the 8th to 10th best team in the country, which isn't a fraud team at all. But at the same time, they need to play better defense if they want to win games. And I was actually impressed with the defense they played, especially late against Rutgers. Also, look out for the name Keegan Murray. He had 14 points in this game, including hitting 2 big free throws to wrap up the win for Iowa. If Iowa, they're a team that has so much experience with Garza and Bohannon and Wieskamp. If they could get a freshman like Murray to get consistently going in this rotation, that would be a huge boost for the Hawkeyes. And then takeaway number 10. One of the best sights I saw this weekend was watching Keontae Johnson on hand for the big-time Florida Gators win against the LSU Tigers. And Florida is a team that we haven't really spoken about much on this show besides the Keontae Johnson injury, and that was obviously very scary, and it feels so good to be watching him in uniform on the bench cheering on his Florida Gator teammates. But let's face facts, Mike White has been a guy that I've been pretty hard on. I was not someone that had Florida in the top 25 in the preseason despite all of their talent. And one of the main reasons for that was because in the past, Mike White has had some talent, but he's never been able to actually win games. But now he grabs this kid, Colin Castleton, the Michigan transfer, and he was phenomenal for Florida in their win against LSU. He really was able to provide them with a big-time spark on the offensive side of the ball. He also played pretty well in their game against Vanderbilt. And let's face it, this is a big year for Mike White and his staff because Florida's been a team that has had all the talent in years past and really has never been able to get the job done. But beating LSU is a really good start at home. I think LSU is a really good team, and the fact that Florida was able to come out like that behind Colin Castleton was really impressive. Scotty Lewis, Trey Mann, Omar Payne. Florida has always been one of the more talented teams in the SEC. However, the results just hasn't always necessarily translated to wins. But now they beat LSU. They have a nice win from earlier in the season over BC, I know that's not a great win, but that's a win over a Power 5 team. And Florida, if they want to be ranked in my top 25, I would have just liked to see them have one more big-time quality win. And I'll be really impressed with the way the Gators look. I was impressed with the way Colin Castleton played down the stretch. And in a wide-open SEC, the Gators are certainly in the mix.